US President Donald Trump doubles down on his global trade war, South Africa has been caught in the crossfire. The stiff 30% tariffs on South African exports to the United States come into force today. Now, government's last-minute efforts to avert the levies failed after US officials snubbed another revised trade proposal. Now, South Africa initially submitted a proposed trade deal to President Donald Trump's administration in May and revised it again in June, also without getting a response. The tariffs have stirred fear and uncertainty in the country, where the central bank has estimated that 100,000 jobs could be at risk, with the agriculture and automotive sectors the most affected. Now, the United States is South Africa's second largest bilateral trading partner after China. South Africa exports cars, some manufactured goods, citrus fruits and wine to the United States. Business reporter Ndogozo Khumalo joins me now in studio to talk a little bit more about these far-reaching implications that we have from these tariffs. Good morning to you, Ndogozo.
Good morning.
I think let's start by explaining these tariffs, because some people may not understand exactly what this means. Does it mean that things will cost 30% more, or they're only going to be 30% of what they are, etc.? Let's give it to people straight here. What exactly do these tariffs mean?
Well, they wouldn't necessarily mean higher prices for South Africans.
Yeah.
I think that's the clarity. It's
100%.
more for the consumers in the United States. And the challenge there is there's already so much competition that it would be hard for South African businesses to remain competitive, because that then pushes up their input costs, it pushes up where they source their products, because it's also then things of quality, products, quality and so on. So it's the impact more on the businesses that are exporting to the United States, where consumers will then face higher prices to get those South African products. But how it, of course, impacts us is what that means then for jobs in South Africa, and then the economy. So that's where the trickle effect then comes, because then eventually we may also find ourselves paying higher prices on the back of inflation, depending, of course, how that goes. And we have seen a slight uptick if we look at data from Statistics South Africa when it comes to business liquidations. We were on a steady decline of businesses closing shop, but over the last 3 months, we've steadily seen that increase again. So it's that kind of concern when it comes to South African consumers and how it would impact us. It's the impact on the businesses.
So ultimately, if this pen had cost somebody in the United States $100, I mean, that's a lot, but if it was $100,
it's more like a television.
Exactly. Then this would be $130 from now on, which means that they're looking at it going, it's not as competitive. It doesn't make sense to buy it from South Africa anymore. So they then don't buy that South African item, which means our exports don't actually have a market to go to. And
the producers can't afford to produce
100%,
at scale,
yes.
Because being able to manufacture products, and I suppose that's why the DTIC has also been harping on saying, let's focus on industrialization, let's focus on getting that manufacturing capacity up in South Africa, perhaps expecting that blue tick from the US when it comes to the deal that we put forward, because then it makes it hard for South African manufacturers to effectively compete with other markets, such as China, that has that manufacturing capacity to get out a lot of products to the markets and potentially lower prices, something that South Africa doesn't quite have. And I think that's what even central banks have been pricing in, Arabile. Yesterday, we did have that interest rate cut. And I think amongst us in the room, the conspiracy was, hey, might we start seeing a hike anytime soon? Might we go back to that restrictive environment? But of course, Governor Kganyago saying that they had penciled that in, and he did announce that in the announcements at May, that they'd painted in a scenario for that 30% tariff and what it could possibly mean. So let's take a listen to what he's had to say then.
What we have found around the world is that the other central banks do as we are doing as well. They pose a scenario and say, if this happens, if that happens, and we have presented that scenario, and we presented that scenario with a 30%, 25% tariff and the departure, the non-renewal of AGOA. We had since incorporated the 30% tariff into our baseline. Call it okay, if this is the worst case, this is how the game is going to be. There isn't a correct way of dealing with this uncertainty. You just have to accept that is what it is. There is so much uncertainty in the world that there is even a publication which I do not have to advertise here, which compiles an uncertainty index, and it tries to check how many times this uncertainty is used. And to check, attended conferences over the past 6 months, they all have uncertainty in them. Financial stability in the era of uncertainty, monetary policy in the era of uncertainty.
All right, so the governor then ultimately saying, we've priced this in, we're looking at this. I mean, look, we could talk about interest rates, and we're going to a little bit later on, actually. We do have a guest at 8:30 who's going to be talking to us about what this means for home loans and homeowners then as well. But there's a tariff desk now that has supposedly been implemented or has always been there. What exactly is the situation here from the DTIC?
Well, I mean, the language used by the DTIC is that they've launched this support desk because of this impasse and because of these issues, to help then exporters really understand what they need to do as next steps. And it's also for potential exporters, so even small and medium-sized businesses that are still considering export markets, it's supposed to assist them. So I'd reached out to the department requesting to be able to go out there just to explain how it works, share those details, and perhaps speak to one of the leads. But I got the response from the spokesperson, Kamil Ali, and he said, well, it's not actually a physical desk. It's just being staffed with more personnel that then focus on exports, which I do find strange because...
So it has existed.
That resource has always existed. You know, when you go to the DTIC website, the export tab has always been there that gives businesses an outline on, are they export ready? What markets they could tap into? Sure. Give them details on trade-related events that would be taking place that South Africa is involved in. So that information has been there, but I suppose perhaps it's saying they are now having specific leads for specific export markets that people can then talk to for more detailed conversations, I suppose, and information.
Perhaps it's just extended support.
Extended support is what I'd call it.
Yeah, 100%. Dogozo, appreciate it. Thank you so much for helping us unpack this.